Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of our Galanton podcast, co-hosted by myself, Babar Rahim, and Maulana Sajid. Maulana Sajid is the Imam at Masjid Umar, head of the Paradise Academy, which is the Madrasa arm of the Galanton Muslim Welfare Association, and volunteer at our Galanton. Today, we have a special guest, Brother Yusuf Patel from SRE Islamic, and we're talking about a topic which is close to many people's heart. RSE, relationship and sex education, which is being introduced into schools. So, what is
So the Baba, you frozen? We didn't hear the question.
I was just asking. I was just asking the brother there. What is SRE Islamic?
Okay, so we're an organization that supports parents. That was established in 2008, in October 2008, and really it was about supporting parents. First of all, to be informed about what's being taught in schools and understand what's being taught in primary schools and secondary schools in terms of what was then called sex and relationship education, but then also to take appropriate actions in schools to ensure that what is being taught is not inappropriate, and as well as that, supporting parents to discuss issues around sexual relationship with their children in line with our Islamic values.
So I think one of the questions which comes off straight off that is what is being taught and who's it being taught to?
Yeah, so I think firstly, what's really important to make clear is that when people say RSE, that is not entirely correct in terms of what is going to be taught, because in primary schools from September 2020, from this month, it's our RSE is not statutory. What is statutory is a new subject called relationships education, and that means that sex education is not going to be made a compulsory statutory subject in schools. And actually, if a school decides to teach it, you can still withdraw your children. That doesn't mean that what's going to be taught in primary schools is not without its problems, because we've seen a lot of discussion and a lot of toing and throwing about the issue of, for example, same-sex relationships, around issues of to what extent do the relationship education requirements in terms of the learning outcomes, to what extent are they benign in terms of they're harmless, and to what extent will schools add to them to make it to make what is being taught much more difficult for us as parents to accept. But then obviously in a secondary school they will be discussed sex education, relationship and sex education will be statutory subjects in all secondary schools. And one of the problems in secondary schools is that parents used to have the right to withdraw from sex education in secondary schools, but that's been taken away and that's been downgraded. So now parents will have the right to request withdrawal in secondary schools. And I think obviously there's probably a lot to unpack within what's happening in primary and secondary schools as well, which probably will happen as we progress in the conversation, inshallah.
So going back to you mentioned there in primary school that part of it is compulsory and part of it's optional there. So the optional part, if I wanted to withdraw my child and I have a child in primary school, so first of all, how do I find out if my school is teaching that optional module you talked about there?
Yeah, that's right. So if a school, if your children go to a school and a primary school and they decide to teach sex education classes, that's not something that the government has made statutory. That means schools do not have to implement this subject. But if they do, you have the full right to withdraw. You don't have to give any reasons. You don't have to explain to the head teacher. You can just say, I would like to, according to the Education Act, I would like to fulfill my statutory duty or a statutory right of withdrawing my children from any sex education classes delivered within this primary school. And so you have that right.
So do they have to tell us before they start teaching that class, or is it on the parents to go and find out?
I think so. It's basically, it's even before 2020, in the previous years when I've been speaking to parents have called me. it's been a bit patchy because there is no official guidance as to what schools should do in terms of informing parents. So some schools may inform parents that this is going to be taking place. Some schools may inform you a couple of days beforehand. Some schools may not inform you. So it's really important, first of all, to find out whether the school is going to be teaching sex education classes separate from the relationship education, which is statutory. And then if so, and if you're not happy with what they're teaching, then you can exercise your right to withdraw.
Brother Yusuf, a lot of people always ask the question, why did the Muslims have the uproar, and why are they shouting, and why did we see the scenes in Birmingham that we saw, and why all up and down the country there were, talks going on by yourself and other people regarding RSE. Can you elaborate on this point?
I think there's a couple of issues here. One is, first of all, that we should first of all say we're not happy that the government has made these subjects statutory. First of all, these subjects were made statutory on a whole host of different reasons, but really a lot of lobby groups pressurized the government to do that. But in this country, for decades, parents have had the right to withdraw from these subjects, and that's been fundamentally taken away from parents. And actually, what the problem is that lots of schools have taught very inappropriate resources in these subjects for a number of years. And so if past experience is any measure, then we also will have a problem with some of the things that they're going to teach in these subjects from September 2020 onwards. Now, I think, why is it that the Muslim community is worried about this, and why aren't other communities just as worried? Firstly, I think, we live in a very secular liberal society, and the reality is that lots of communities once upon a time held very closely to their religious traditions, especially their religious traditions when they talked about moral aspects, family life, and things like that. What we've found over decades is that actually most of the religious communities have moved away from these aspects. So the Church of England, the Catholic Church, even to a certain extent, different Jewish groups have moved away from this, such that when I speak regularly to this a lady who's part of a pro-life organization that works in this area a lot, and she speaks to lots of parents very regularly around these issues. And she says to me very clearly that 9 out of 10 calls that she gets about sex education in schools and concerns about that are from Muslim parents. And she said, look, the problem is that all the other communities have, to a certain extent, just given in to the diktats of a secular liberal society. And that means that sometimes when we as the Muslim community start to speak about these issues, sometimes we feel ourselves as lonely voices in this struggle. And that can be a problem, but I think we actually should think of ourselves as doing a service for every other community and for the children, especially in these schools. Because if you really speak to most people and say, look, is it appropriate for these to be the resources that show a naked man and woman to be shown to 8-year-old children, as has been done in primary schools in the past, in some primary schools in the past, they'll say, no, it's not appropriate. Is it appropriate for 7 or 8-year-old age children to be taught about touching themselves sexually? They'll say, no, absolutely not. This is unacceptable. But this has been taught in schools, in some schools, not all schools. So I think there is, but the problem is that a lot of these communities will not do much about it because they've almost given in to what society has decided is acceptable for children to see. And that therefore Muslims sometimes have to show the responsibility on behalf of everybody.
And Brother Yusuf, like in our title of this podcast, we mentioned, will my child that's 5-year-old, will he be taught sex education? So I think a lot of parents, especially around primary school, is this a yes or no answer? Or I know you did highlight that some schools might not talk about the sex education, but they will talk about relationship. So what is the difference between relationship education, sex education? Because I know I work closely with a primary school, and especially when last year when there was an uproar and the situation in Birmingham, and so they did sit me down and they said, look, we want to highlight to our community that we will not be talking about the S, but we
Yeah,
will
yeah,
be
yeah.
talking about relationship education. So relationship education, I know I've understood what that is, but can you, because sometimes when we think of relationship, oh yeah, that's okay. They just talk about relationship, but then it's also obvious we don't live in a Muslim country. We live in a non-Muslim country. Obvious the relationship of heterosexuals, homosexuals, everybody that lives in society, they want to portray to their children that this is what our society is made up of. So can you just elaborate on these points?
So I think I think that's a very good question. I think the difference being is that relationships education in primary school and relationships and sex education in secondary school have certain learning outcomes that the government has set. In primary school, there's about 4 topic areas that the school has to teach, and lots of learning outcomes within them. And secondary schools have 5 topic areas to cover with lots of learning outcomes within them. Now, these set out what the school should be teaching in those 2 areas. In a primary school, sex education doesn't have any learning outcomes because it's not a statutory subject. So schools they don't have to follow any set learning outcomes. They don't have to, there's no topics or subject areas that are required because it's not a curriculum subject. Whereas in relationship education and in primary school and relationship sex education in secondary school, these are curriculum subjects which have learning outcomes attached to them. So you can see if a parent, for example, wants to see that, they can go on the website that we have, they can see the learning outcomes in both primary and secondary school. So then that is one of the ways in which parents can say to a school, are you teaching beyond what is required in a primary school or what is required in a secondary school? And it gives parents a bit more of a measure to challenge some of the over teaching that may possibly take place. But one of the very important things to note is when we were talking about this particular question, is that whenever parents come to me and say, look, what are they going to teach to my child at 5? And I cannot give a definitive answer about it. Nobody can, because schools will differ in many respects around these issues. So it's very important that parents go to their children's school and find out what they're planning to teach. Because one of the important things about the learning outcomes that the government has set down for both primary schools and for secondary schools is that they haven't attached any year groups to these learning outcomes. Rather, they've said whenever you feel it's appropriate, or we're allowing you the flexibility to decide when to teach these topic areas. And then secondly, the government has not set any resources that a school has to use. So the resources are up to the school to decide. So all of this is really meant to be a conversation, a set of conversations that take place between schools and parents, and trying to find a way in which to find out to determine a course for that school, like a future direction for that school, which meets the needs of the pupils, the parents, and the school. So I think it's really important that parents get involved in discussions with schools, because one of the things is schools have to consult parents on the when and how. The when is which year groups to cover the curriculum outcomes, and how, which teaching materials and resources to use to convey those learning outcomes. And I think so it's very important that parents go to school and say, when are you planning to consult me? And another very quick point of advice to parents is that the government said a few months ago that because of lots of schools closed in March because of COVID-19, and lots of schools were planning to have these consultation sessions either in March, April, May, June, or beginning of July, ready for this new school year. But because of COVID-19 and closures, they were not able to have these consultation events. So the government said that we allow schools, because of the closures, schools are allowed to delay the implementation of these subjects up to the beginning of the summer term, which is April 2020. So another question parents would ask schools is, are you planning to delay the implementation? And if they haven't consulted parents, they have to delay the implementation. So the two questions are you going to delay the implementation? And within the next few months, how are you planning to consult with parents? And if you are, I would really like to be a part of that consultation process.
And Brother Yusuf, in primary school, like we just much you mentioned a lot. So if I was a parent with my child that's in a primary school, my job is to go to the school uh, and ask them, are you teaching relationship education and sexual education? Is that true? Or what?
Yeah. Well, basically, there will be teaching relationship education. The
Yeah.
point is, when are they going to start to teach it? Whether it's going to be September, if they've done the consultation in September. If they haven't, they can delay up to the beginning of April, or
And
up to after the Easter holidays when they come back from school, summer
and some
term.
of the content I've seen from various lectures I've been to were very explicit for young children, and there were even pictures. There were also relationships of there were two kings or something. So just to, uh, I think there is a big emphasis, especially about homosexuality. So all these things do concern the Muslims, but again, living in this country, especially relationship, I don't think you can't say much about it. Or you can't do anything about it. Um, is that true?
So I think the point is that because nobody has said to a school you have to use a particular book or particular resource or particular sets of materials, it's really up to schools to decide. So if a school says we have to use this book called King and King, for example, or we have to use this My Princess Boy book in our nursery, then you say no. Actually, where is it written down in any government guidance or any curriculum requirements around the teaching in the school? Where is it said that you have to use these resources? And so really all of these resources are choices of schools. The best thing to do is really to engage the school in a discussion. Now, the point that you mentioned a couple of times about living in a secular liberal society and that this is not a Muslim country, so we can't then decide on what resources and what sort of things the school can and cannot do. But the issue is actually to a certain extent we can. Obviously, in relation to, for example, the government guidance clearly states that in relation the school has to have due regard in relation to teaching resources. They have to have due regard to two things. One is the age of pupils, and the second thing is the religious background of pupils. So these two issues are very important. We need to ask questions to schools. How are you going to take the age and religious background of pupils into account when deciding on how you teach the subject and which resources you're going to use? Because this
But,
is what the guidance sets out.
but
But
Brother
the
Yusuf,
point is about, sorry.
sorry, in Birmingham, regarding the school in Birmingham, when I think the parents did um, stand up and they wanted to consult the schools. Um, I don't know. Well, what I've heard is that they weren't very welcoming. That why you questioning us and what materials we are using. Plus, I heard. I again, we shouldn't speculate. The deputy head was from a particular background, and he pushed for these books to be um, taught in the school. So I'm saying sometimes, like we know the Trojan horse incidents and everything. So whenever a Muslim goes and sits with the head teacher or as a community, sometimes I think Muslims get scared that we'll get labeled as extremists or whatever, even though in the laws your religion should be respected, and you have a right to question. But I think a lot of parents then fear that if we go to the head teacher, they will start questioning, who are you to question us? Nobody else is complaining, um, and then people just stay quiet.
Yeah, I think in terms of one thing that's really important in this issue is to say that the Birmingham example, yeah, in terms of it was two schools out of all of the primary schools in Birmingham that decided to teach it in a particular way, and one of those schools said we are not using this no outsiders resources. The other school said we are using the no outsiders resources, but for all intents and purposes, they were both teaching LGBT relationships in a way they said that we have to. But this was not part of relationships education. These were primary schools that were not teaching it as part of relationships education. They were teaching as part of what they said was a requirement under equality legislation. And that was a contested issue, because if it was a case that schools have to teach it in this particular way, then why was it the case that there were only 2 schools in Birmingham that teaching it in that particular way? And I think so firstly, and plus this was before the requirements of 2020. This happened last year. And so I think what needs to happen is that we wrote a guidance document addressed to head teachers and governing boards of primary schools and secondary schools. I said, look, the reality is that the Birmingham situation happened as a result of the fact that the ingredients for conflict were created. And what were those ingredients for conflict? The ingredients for conflict were created because parents felt they were not being listened to, that their views were not being considered when the school was deciding how to teach these subjects. Put it on, turn it on. Sorry, my daughter just turned off the lights. But so the problem is that what we've got to convey to schools is that, look, we don't want conflict to happen between parents and the schools. Yeah, that is not what we want. Yeah, that nobody wants that. Even the parents in Birmingham, when they protested outside of schools, they could have been doing something much more productive with their time. They could have been spending their time with their children, doing work, shopping, all sorts of things. They didn't want to protest outside schools. They were forced into that situation because the school just was not responding to their legitimate concerns. And in some respects, in one of those schools, the school was just not didn't even want to engage in a dialogue with the parents. So all of those conflict happened, and parents, it was like a boxing ring. Parents were on one corner and the school on the other corner, and there was no way that could be resolved to the extent that this is still an issue there. So I think what we're going to say to schools is that to avoid what happened in Birmingham happening elsewhere, we've got to ensure that schools and parents work together to ensure what is going to be taught meets the requirements of the pupils and the parents, and that their views are taken into account. So, for example, one thing, consultation is required by schools when they are before they implement these subjects. Now, the problem is that the government hasn't clarified what consultation means, what meaningful consultation looks like. What does a school have to do in order to get parental views, to understand what parental views are? Do they have to just ask people whether they like the materials or not? Or do they have to ask questions? And when parents come back and say, we don't like these particular resources or these particular pages in this book, is not appropriate, we don't think it's for our children and their religious background, and the school says, no, we can't do anything about it, is that consultation? Or is consultation, you're happy with these resources, but you're not happy with these 2 pages in these resources? Okay, we'll remove these 2 pages. If that's what school does, that's good. That's a meaningful consultation process. So we've got to say to schools, you need to do much more than you're used to doing in these subjects. And with the LGBT issue, if a school is going to discuss about LGBT families and say, look, we've interpreted our relationship education curriculum as being, we have to discuss this, and Ofsted, when they come, they're going to expect us to have taught these in a particular way, then we say, look, the way you teach these subjects, first of all, there is no requirement to teach it at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. Why not teach it when a child is 9 or 10, or before in year 5 or year 6, before they go to secondary school? And when you do talk about this, you can't talk about it beyond saying different people in our society live, they're from different backgrounds. You may come across people who consider themselves LGBT, people who are disabled, people who have different protected characteristics. You're going to come across these people throughout your life, but they should not talk about these relationships in a way which goes beyond the factual positions. People exist. That's the factual position. Men are allowed to marry according to the law in this country, whether we like it or not. Women are allowed to marry in this country. But when they start saying to children, as they did in Birmingham and have done elsewhere, Zainab, you're a girl, but you could be a boy, because you could change, just like you change your hair color, you could change your gender from a boy to a girl or girl to a boy. Or Abdullah, what does it feel like to be a gay person? Imagine if you were marrying your friend Jeffrey, how would you feel? Now that's going well beyond what a school is required to do to teach about respect and to teach the factual positions about different types of people. That's going into what we call proselytizing. That's like giving, that's imposing values upon children from communities do not accept these values. In our lives, we come across people who we disagree with every day. People who drink, people who gamble, people who may not even believe in God. People who say, "I'm an atheist," and how do we deal with them? We don't say, "You're an atheist, I'm not going to deal with you." No, we treat, if they're our neighbor, we fulfill their rights. If they're in our workplace, we work with them. Yeah, but there's nothing in the law which makes people accept other people's lifestyle choices if it goes against their own beliefs. Nobody is forced to believe in what I believe as a Muslim, and we should not be forced to believe in what anybody else believes in as an atheist or as somebody from the LGBT community, someone in a same-sex relationship. So I think we need to really stress to schools that there's a clear distinction between factual positions and the way some schools handle it by almost promoting and endorsing certain relationships and making it seem as though these are things that children should pursue as almost lifestyle goals.
Brother Yusuf, I think that you mentioned, and the thing is, if you got a child in primary school, the consultation with the school in a nice way, have a dialogue, talk to them that as a parent, I do have concerns regarding RSE. So what will you teach? What materials would you use? We want to have an input in this because it's my child's education. We have that right to ask these questions.
Yeah.
But like you said, I think the schools, with my experience, is that the school's answers are always, we have to reflect the society we live in. So we will talk about these topics. And again, what I've seen is, if you got a member of staff in a particular school that is from a particular society, from the LGBT community, now, and if he's been given that topic or whatever, he's going to teach that quite passionately. Do you understand? So there could be many, and I think, like you just mentioned, it's, yeah, you just mentioned the just above. You don't need to go further on, but that the thing is, when your child's gone into a classroom, you just don't know what's been taught, and I think and I think the two main concerns, especially in the Muslim community, one was homosexuality, and second of all was the gender. And where we were hearing stories where, if a child didn't want to go into a boys' toilet, he can go into a girls' toilet, and if he thinks he's a girl, and I think we as Muslims, we were worried that our children, where they're going to get confused from such a young age, one thing in their identity, whether they're a boy or girl, and second of all their sexuality, because these things, they're taboo topics. We don't even talk about heterosexuality at that age. Forget homosexuality, because they're quite young. But again, the counter arguments that I've had from people is, well, today's kids are learning fast. They've got the mobile. They know what's going on, and let's not play blind that they don't know.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you get a response like that, and then even the Muslim community, they're saying, well, Imam, it's everywhere, and so what if they get taught this? Do you understand? So
I think there's a couple of good, really interesting points there. One is that the issue is that whenever the way these subjects are covered by a policy, so in a primary school there should be a relationships education policy that is written and drafted by the governors of a school. Now, this policy should define how the subject is taught, when it's taught, which resources are used, who is in charge of this subject, who is the lead in that school, how often is that policy reviewed, and for example, things like how are parents consulted about this around the policy. There's a statutory requirement that parents are parents are consulted. So school can't just write the policy related to relationship education or relationship and sex education, to write the policy and then ratify it and then publish it and then show it to parents. No, they have to consult with parents about the the contents. Now, a policy needs to be such that it defines the subject in such a way that it doesn't allow for parents in the classroom then to define the whole subject. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Rather, it should define the subject such that the teacher in the classroom knows how this subject is going to be organized, so that their personal feelings and opinions and their personal baggage should not then interfere in what they teach and how they teach it. So, for example, there may be a man who's a teacher, a male teacher, who may have on-off girlfriends, many girlfriends. Now, that should not come into the classroom to say, "Yeah, look, yesterday night I was with one girlfriend. Tomorrow night I'll be with another girlfriend." That's not the way teaching works. There should be a clear dividing line between the private life of the teacher and what they teach in the classroom. And so, really, the policy we as parents, when we speak to schools, we need to be clear and really push to schools that the policy needs to be very clear, very clearly written, that the personal views of teachers should not come into these discussions, and that schools should teach these subjects in a way which can reflect the communities in which we live, but in a factual way, and not in a way which talks about these issues in a way which promotes certain lifestyles of other lifestyles, whether that be same-sex relationships or opposite-sex relationships.
For Brother Yusuf, now in schools, whether it's going to be with the book or in the curriculum, as you enter a school, sometimes they'll have posters where it'll be man, wife, 2 men, 2 women, just to describe, just like, we are a school that, invites everybody and things. So obviously, subconsciously, a child then accepts that this relationship is normal and acceptable. Like I said to you, obviously, we live in a secular society where, this is not a Muslim country, and we respect and the different people that live in here and their choices, whatever they make. But obviously, if you go to a school where, say, 99% are Muslims, you do. So sometimes it's not just curriculum based; it can be just posters, and it can be just these things.
Yeah. The point is, I think the issue is obviously, definitely, we're not going to be able, and I think I'm trying to make this clear when I speak to parents all the time, we're not going to be able to stop our children from coming across all of the ideas and values, concepts and behaviors, that we don't agree with in schools or outside of schools. The way society is heading in, if my children used to watch this program, they don't watch much TV, but they watch one thing here and there. They used to watch this program on the TV about football. It was on a children's channel. And my wife commented, she sat down and watched it with them and said, "Look, they're not watching this ever again," because the program, every single family that was depicted in that, none of them had a mother and a father. And every other child was coming out and saying, I am gay. And this is completely not reflective of the reality of the society in which we live. We need to, as parents, recognize that we're not going to be able to stop our children from coming across the foreign values, the values that we disagree with from around them. But that means that we need to, as parents, be much more in touch with our children about what they come across and what they believe and what they don't believe, and we start asserting our responsibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to ensure that from a young age, children learn that you come across many behaviors from other people. People behave in many different ways, but this is not how Muslims behave. And then as they get older, that discussion can take on a more complex form by when they come across these things, to say, look, this is not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines for us in terms of how we live and how we behave and how we, our life, it has a purpose. Our purpose is set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to worship and obey him. And so therefore, whenever we think about what is a normal behavior, what is not a normal behavior, that's defined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not by us. So we need to be much more assertive. Now, sometimes parents will say, the madrasa has to do this, the madrasa has to do that, this masjid has to do that. No, the masjid and madrasa can help us to ensure that we teach our children these correct values. But the issue is that part of the problem is that sometimes as parents, we haven't taken responsibility for what is essentially our task. Yeah, to our tarbiyah, our nurturing of our children from almost the seed, the plant that grows, and the behavior that we teach them to emulate from ourselves. And in terms of the discussions that we have in our ta'aleem, in our discussions with our children, all of this really is primarily about us. We know our children better than anybody else, better than any teacher, better than any imam, because we are around our children throughout the whole day. They're with us. We can see what makes them tick and how what sort of things they believe in, what they don't believe in. I think we've got to really take responsibility for this act. To know that the upbringing of children is our responsibility. And so whenever I speak to parents, I say, look, we're never going to be able to fully almost protect our children from all of these things that are around them. Yeah. And we've got to accept that and own that. Yeah. And then we've got to respond to that by saying, what can we do then to ensure that they're given timely information around these issues so that they don't accept these things as normal? They can see pictures of different relationships every day. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll accept that as normal. But we've got to challenge what they accept as normal. Say, no, this is not normal. You know, your mother and father bring you up. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines how we live our family lives. So I think really it's about thinking about our own responsibilities and relationships, and definitely the madrasas and maktabs and others can come and help us in that task. But primarily that's our role to engender in our own children.
So there's a couple of questions coming in. I get this question, I read the questions at some point. So what we're hearing here is like whether we like it or not, right? So we've got an option here around the sex education for the primary children, and we can obviously do the opting out for that. The relationship education is going to be taught, if you like it or not. Mm-hmm. The extent that we should get involved is quite high. We should go to the schools and just say to them, listen, what are you teaching? Show me when's the consultation happening? Show me the resources you're going to use. Put it across to the school that actually all you really need to do is be very factual. But the point still stands here, and I think this is the concern of some of the parents or some of the people in the comments here, is that they're going to be exposed to views which are not prevalent in or not accepted by us. So, and we've talked there that obviously the parents need to step in there and they actually almost predispose their children of what's right and what's wrong. So when they hear these new views, they have a understanding of what's right, what's wrong. Well, and I'm going to put this to Molna Sahib. Are the masjids going to do something? And I say this because Molna Sahib is obviously the head of our Masjid Umar Paradise Academy. So are the masjids going to do anything around almost mirroring a relationship education to almost not counter, but actually complement? So this is what you're going to hear at school. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about relationship education and stuff like that. That will also then complement what the parents are saying at home. So the message is coming from multiple directions. Allah, anything on that?
Yeah. If we don't talk about this RSE, as a Muslim, when we were bringing up our children, and we probably had the same tarbiyat as we were growing up, especially when you go to the madrasa from young age, you've been taught how to do istinja, wuzu. So you have to clean your private parts, and you've got to do wudu, and you've got to clean yourself. But we've always avoided talking about sexual relationship, even though like in the fiqh, there's a lot about masail regarding sexual relationship. And even when you keep the fast, you can't eat, you can't drink, and you can't fulfill your desires. And so the thing is, but when you teach that to your children in the madrasa, you only talk about not eating, not drinking. So the thing was, we always thought once they got close to being mature, when they're hitting 11, 12, 13, then those conversations started about maturity, the signs of maturity, and what happens when you mature, and what should you do, how should you take a bath, how should you clean yourself. And then different challenges you'll face. So that's what used to happen. But what's happened is, and especially since it's uproar, and I can see in the comments as well, the parents, like, not like somebody's mentioned, not every parents are educated or whatever. But like, when we've gone through the process, when we got to high school, I remember in primary school when you talk about girls, you say, you run away from girls. But when it got to high school, because you started to mature, the mindset changes, and then you learn through science and whatever different subjects you had your sexual education that time, and you learned different things, and then people just learn. So what's happened now is, because children are growing up a lot faster, and I don't schools want to reflect this. Um, but we now it's becoming a challenge for us. Do we talk to 5, 6 year olds about homosexuality, heterosexuality? It's a big thing. Yes, I understand, especially after maturity or before maturity, we do talk about these changes. The male teachers talk to the boys, the female teachers talk to the girls. This is what's going to happen. But do we? And this is a question to the Yusuf, and I think a lot of ulama are having these concerns. What age? Because sometimes you don't want to teach too much to a small child.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, on the other hand, like you said, if they're learning all this in school, that what the literature we have seen, and they're normalizing a relationship, do we then, from a young age, start putting them that, look, Allah Ta'ala made Adam and Eve, Allah Ta'ala made man and woman, and we do get married. And I suppose we do talk about this when we talk about Adam alayhi salam and the story of Adam alayhi salam. And you just mentioned, Allah, look, Allah made a man and Allah made a woman, and Allah made them get married, and they had children. So we talk about that. But do we particularly go, I mentioned this, a heterosexual relationship, do we talk about these things? This is a conversation now, even with Brother Yusuf, that how do madrasas, do we, from a young age, do we tackle this? Or has it come to that point yet? Or, sometimes to know too much is good, sometimes it's no good. It is a concern. But I think from high school, if you talked about the different types of relationship, you talked about these things of maturity, you talked about leading up to marriage, the importance of marriage, the importance of purity, staying away from zina, staying away from sins that are norm in the society. But as a Muslim, then you obviously could give examples of Maryam alayhi salam, you could give plenty of examples of pious predecessors. So the thing is, you could talk, but when you have those conversations, you are having conversation with mature children, which will accept it. When you're having 5, 6, 7 year old kids and you're talking like that, they'll be laughing and giggling and what you're talking about. And so it's really thrown us back, that where do we go from here? I don't know if Brother Yusuf can.
I think there's a couple of issues here. One is that we've got to recognize that some of the discussions we're going to have with our children, just because of the environment in which our children are living in, a hypersexualized society, we're going to have much sooner than we would definitely have liked. Which is problematic in itself, but it's a reflection of the fact that we have to change to adapt to what we know our children will come across. But also, I think what's really important is that I don't really think, and I've never been a big fan of having like big classroom discussions with children about these subjects. Now, there is a need in some respects for that. If, for example, there's sometimes some parents in our communities are not very comfortable in discussing some of these issues with their children. But I think the reality is that what's best is that sometimes you can get a group of children who are the same age, maybe 8 years old or 9 years old. Now, you can't say they're all the same, in terms of their intellectual abilities, their comprehension abilities, in terms of things that they'll understand and things that they'll brush aside. So to take a one-size-fits-all approach to all of them and say we're going to discuss this particular curriculum at 8, 9, 10, 11 doesn't really. It means that for some children you'll be addressing their issues, other children you won't be addressing the issues that they personally will face because it's too late. For other children, you'll be exposing them to issues which they're not even concerned about at that age. That's what I really think. And I know sometimes parents can feel that that's too much for them, but parents are the best people to discuss with their children, because they know the developmental maturity of their children, how what they know about what influences are around their children. They know what sort of things will be enough for them to be enough information for them to be okay with, and then you can have that follow-up conversation continuously. You're there, you're an ever-present part of their lives. You have one teacher who gives them one class, and then they don't have that teacher again, or they don't have that reference point again. Really, you need parents to be the reference points for children who have ongoing discussions with their children, and a person that can go to ask these questions to, not just today or tomorrow, but for as long as is necessary. That's why parents, I think, as parents, we need to step up our, and I'm including myself in that, because I'm a parent as well. We need to step up our approaches to this. We want to create. I want to create some resources for parents. See, how do you discuss these things with your children? What are different methods and different approaches to take around these issues?
But Brother Yusuf, sometimes it's just the simple messages. I remember when we were young, especially on the TV, if you saw a pig or if you said pig, automatically you had to say toba, toba, toba 3 times.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think you had to hold your ear. So sometimes, and especially remember, like we mentioned, sometimes it's not just going to be in the curriculum. This is going to be, the other day, my children were watching a football match, and between the match, there was an advertisement of a car, but it was 2 women that were driving the car, and then they started to kiss. And obviously, it was just normalizing an LGBT, and especially like now in the football, you see the LGBT equality and all this. So obviously, kids will ask, "What's this?" This is a perfect opportunity for parents to have the conversation with their children. Yes, like you mentioned, then if they come to Mosque Madrasa, then sometimes you don't need to have a classroom atmosphere, or you don't need to but you can say, yeah, this is the society we live in, but in Islam it's not acceptable. Just like somebody that if he decides to drink sharab, it's haram, even if it's a Muslim, and a sin is a sin. And I think the biggest thing is that we as Muslims and should teach our children is that this is a sin. Homosexuality is a sin, just like drinking is sin, just like zina is sin. So that people don't think it's halal and doing it, because that's when your iman comes in jeopardy. If you make something that's haram into halal, and then you're changing the deen. And so that's why, yes, we respect, like you mentioned before, if somebody, and we see on the street when people drink alcohol, we don't, what you're doing. No, that's their choice, that's their lifestyle, and that's their way. You can sometimes, if you have a conversation, a dialogue with somebody, you can mention the harms, effects of drinking alcohol. It destroys your body, it's not good for you. And as a Muslim, we say it's haram. Allah's made it haram for us. That's why we don't drink. And just like that, the heterosexual relationship, Allah Ta'ala made man and woman, and that's the natural way, and that's always been the way of the prophets. Is Allah Ta'ala created Adam and Hawa, and that's and that's, sometimes you can just have a small conversation. And I think, like you mentioned, when parents are at home and you're talking about Adam alayhi salam, you could just mention, look, Allah made husband and wife, and that's the Muslim way, and that's the sunnah of all the prophets. Do you understand? So you don't need to drill. So you just need to keep on putting these messages.
That's right.
Within the child. It's just like I said, that toba, 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 pig. As soon as the pig, you said toba, toba, toba. So
and that's very important, because I remember when I was growing up, my mother, whenever she was telling me off for something I did wrong, which is quite often, she would say things like, when you grow up and you get married and you have children, and those children disobey you like you disobey me, what it feels to be heartbroken, and although she was telling me off, she was saying to me, what is expected, what is the expectation for a Muslim is that you're going to get married and have children. And so because she said that quite often, that built that understanding of marriage within me very strongly. I remember once my mother told me, we were walking down the street, she was taking me to school, I was probably about 6 years old. She said, if alcohol ever touches your skin, Yeah, you'd have to chop. You have to cut off that skin. And
Yeah.
for that moment, I really had such an aversion to alcohol. I said, no way do I want to be anywhere near alcohol. When I used to go past the off license, I used to hold my breath. It's like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I know it's factually it's not correct, but the point is clear. The point is that when you build aversion to something continuously, then a connection to something that's displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or something that's bad or negative, then that affects someone's behavior. The problem is that to be honest, because as a community or in society generally, we become so scared about saying that that same-sex acts are acts of sin. Yeah, sometimes we are almost helping the normalization of that within our young people. Yeah, and this really is something we need to deal with. There's nothing illegal about saying that the act of a man and man or woman and woman in engaging in any sexual acts is a sin. There's nothing illegal about that. Yeah.
And it's not a sin just within Islam, it was sin within Christianity,
Yeah, yeah,
Judaism, and all
yes.
the previous religions.
But the thing is, sometimes we feel as though by saying that we're almost going to create like we'll be in the news, headlines and things like that. And that's that we sometimes if you say things in a way, you say, look, we live with different people in our society. We live with them. We talk to them. We discuss with them. We're within the society, but there are a lot of people that we'll come across that we can have a nice conversation with. I remember in one of my previous workplaces, I had my line manager was LGBT, was gay, and I didn't have a problem with him being my line manager. We had a very respectful conversation about, and I even said to him, "Look, this is what I do outside of work." Yeah, and he respected that. He was respectful of that. Yeah, because he never saw that I mistreated him or backbited him in front of other work colleagues, or he if he gave me work to do, I would do that work to the highest standard. Yeah, so I think the we can still hold on to respect for people in the society around us, but also hold on to our values. Yeah, of what we want, and if we don't address this in our young people, then we're gonna help that normalization process in their minds. These that the
And,
these
and there
relationships
was always the concept of hate the sinner and not the sin. And I think that's what we've got to, uh, have that attitude that, we don't hate. And why? Because at the end of the day, a person, even if he does kufr, and that's the worst kind of sin that Allah Ta'ala doesn't forgive, we still not, we shouldn't hate that person. He's still a creation of Allah Ta'ala. He's still a banda of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who knows, Allah might give them hidayat, um, and Allah might guide them. So the thing is, so you hate the sin, but not the sinner. So you hate the guna, the sin that you're doing, but not the individual, not that person. Because at the end of the day, he's a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And another ayat that comes to my mind, I've forgotten the Arabic context, but uh, the 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 mafhum, the explanation of the ayat is that as long as you are upon iman, you'll be tested, but no fitna will move you as long as you are steadfast upon your iman. And this dunya is full of tests. You'll be tested in different ways. This is another test that we're facing, our children are facing. So the thing is, as long as we put inside our children the correct beliefs, our values, inshallah, nothing will happen to them.
Yeah,
You have
yeah,
that hope in Allah Ta'ala that nothing happens. We've
yes,
got to instill the right beliefs, the right values of Islam, because we are Muslims and we are, and alhamdulillah, in this country, people respect us for that. And just that we, as Muslims, respect others. If they don't want to worship God, that's their choice. If they want to drink alcohol, that's their choice. Somebody wants to smoke, that's their choice. But as a Muslim, this is my choice, and I'm a creation of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and we've got to know that we will be tested, our children will be tested. But the thing is, as long as we keep on embedding within our children every single day the beliefs of Islam, and the more you talk, and I know one sister, much as you mentioned, we should talk about Prophet Lut alayhi salam's story. And I know last year we were doing in our madrasa assemblies every week just on the prophets of Allah. So I did talk about Prophet Lut alayhi salam, and we talked about the sins that occurred by their people. and why they were punished. But again, some of the kids couldn't grasp that thing. So sometimes you got to be careful who you tell what, and you know, uh, is the age appropriate? Do the kids understand? And sometimes you just got to keep the conversation simple rather than difficult. And another thing that I think, Brother Yusuf, is that before we learn things, sometimes you weren't taught things, you just learn things. But I think the time has come now where we might have to educate our children, because they've got their gadgets, they've got their mobile phones, they've got the TV, everything's in front of them. And you're right, everything, whether they go on YouTube, and they're all kind of stuff on there. So the thing is, everything's in front of their face. So sometimes you've got to pinpoint, look, we've got to control our eyes, we've got to control what we watch. And so I think that education has to start. Yeah, before it was we probably grew up a bit innocently, you understand. But I think today times are different, and we have to accept it. They are different. So education, I think, does need to start from home, and I think madrasas then will take it upon. But I think because the conversation has to be relevant and according to the age group, and all these things you've got to bear in mind.
But sorry.
So sorry, brother. I just want to ask, so we've been talking a lot about primary school and the impact of primary school, and how we talk about relationship education in primary school. But I want to, just as we're coming towards the end of the podcast, I want to talk about secondary schools a little bit. And though relationship education will be talked about there, they're also going to be taught sex education. Now, based upon what we've been talking about, that's not an optional module in secondary school. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. In secondary school, there's what we call relationship and sex education. Now, the government has said, and the guidance states, that if a parent wants to withdraw their children from the sex education element of RSE in a secondary school, they can make a request to the head teacher. At the end of the day, the head teacher has the final right to decide on whether to accept that or not. And the government says that in the majority of cases, the school will accept that that request. But so I think so in a secondary school, even in the secondary school, you still can request that your children are withdrawn from the sex education elements of RSE. And then but you've got to then give a reason to the school why you want to remove them from that class. It's not like in primary school where there's no reason required, because your reason will then determine how the head teacher responds to that request. So I think so that just the parents to know that still exists there. One of the problems with the RSE curriculum in a secondary school is that obviously there's no clear line between what is relationship education and what is sex education. It's all one set of learning outcomes. So a school then has to define what it considers to be relationship education and what it considers to be sex education. But I think as part of the consultation process, it's very clear. It's very important to get schools to clarify the difference between the two, which topic areas are relationship education and which topic areas are sex education. Now, if you want more information about what is in those learning outcomes, you can look on our website, sreislamic.org, and you can find a document, which is a guidance document for parents, a parents booklet that you can look at, which has all of the learning outcomes, so that you can acquaint yourself with what is planned for primary and secondary schools.
Brother Yusuf, in secondary, is the content a lot more explicit? That's another concern a lot of parents.
Yeah, so in a secondary school, there's a lot of issues around sexual issues, around consent, around sexually transmitted diseases, around contraceptives, and all of the things that. So all of the explicit content will be in sex education in secondary school. But even then, there's no requirement to cover those elements that are more explicit in year 7, for example, or year 8. Rather, a school has the flexibility to decide when to teach these particular learning outcomes, so they can leave them for later in the secondary school life of the child, as long as they're covered by the end of secondary school, then that's fine. And so I think the main thing is that parents should just acquaint themselves with what schools are planning to teach, And even if they do withdraw from sex education in secondary school, that there is an issue of children learning bits of information from other children in that school, and coming across that. So that doesn't absolve parents from still having those discussions with their children. And it's very important that we still do that as well, inshallah. But
And
one
Brother
thing I wanted
Yusuf,
to say as a final point before is, the issue is that sometimes this situation, yeah, this makes us very disempowered, thinking that all everything around us is stacked up against us. We can't do anything about it. I hear lots of parents saying sometimes, "What's the point? They've decided this already. We can't do anything about it." The reality issue is that every time you engage in a school with the correct intention, inshallah, you'll get reward for that. And inshallah, Allah will help you in fulfilling what you intend to fulfill. And when you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his help and for dua, anything is possible. You can say there's all these things stacked up against us, but if you've got Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with you, then what greater ally do you have than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So what I would say to parents is really make immense dua for your children. Make immense dua for their guidance, for the fact that they remain upright and guided, for the fact that to help you and help us all to raise our children in line with our values. Really, it's very, very important that we do not neglect the dua for our children and do it not just once in a while, do it every day. If you can, after every salah, when you do the dua, make sure you do dua for your children. It's very, very important. It's one of the du'as, as Maulana Sahib can explain maybe more. It's one of the du'as that is often accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help in this, inshallah.
Inshallah. Brother, we have come to the just over the 1 hour mark, and that's how a lot of time is. So I'd like to start with my saying, Jazakallah, this is a topic which has been requested, and it's a topic which is very close to a lot of people's hearts. Obviously, the well-being of our children and the next generation of people is something that everyone worries about. So Thank you for your time. Thank you for being so open and honest with us about such a sensitive topic. Maulana Sahib, any remarks from yourself?
no, mashallah, Brother Yusuf, Jazakallah for coming. And you mentioned dua is very important. And I think sometimes we might talk a lot, we do everything, but we don't turn towards Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala is the one that guides and misguides. And we should constantly ask Allah Ta'ala to keep us steadfast, our next generation to be steadfast upon Islam. And remember, RSE didn't start now. Sex education has been going on in school for years. We've been through schools, systems, everything. So this learning of, this part of learning, sometimes we have ignored, or sometimes we don't talk about. It's a taboo topic. Possibly now we might have to talk about these things, but we can talk about inside our living rooms when something arises or something, or your own child might ask you a question. So with hikmat, with understanding, explain your answer. And if you're stuck in your answer, I'm sure seek guidance either through a SRE Islamic, or some ulama or somebody within your locality. How can I answer my child? But main thing is we have to embed our Islam into our own children. Then as long as you embed your Islam, the Iman, the values, everything, and that's where Ta'aleem is very important at home every single day. Do Ta'aleem 5-10 minutes, and like Masha, even the sister alluded to, talk about the stories of the prophets, talk about the stories of Sahabas. That's the way you're going to inculcate within our children the Iman, what's needed, what's our duties, why are we in this world, why did Allah create Adam and Hawa, and why we are all the children of Adam and Islam, and what's our duty and responsibility. And there will be challenges, and when you open the Quran, those challenges previous nations faced, and we will face, and will continue to face it before Qiyamah. It's not something new or something. So what we've got to do, we've got to be strong, we've got to be steadfast upon the Iman. So this is a duty of the parents, it's the duty of the ustads, of the madrasas, it's the duty, of the Muslim community, that we rise up to this challenge, just like alhamdulillah we've risen up to challenges before. And inshallah, as long as we're steadfast upon Islam, we make dua for our children, inshallah Allah Ta'ala will take care of everything, inshallah. Allah make it easy, inshallah, for all of us.
MashaAllah. Brother Yusuf, do you have any parting comment for our viewers?
Firstly, Jazakumullah khairan for this invitation and this opportunity to address this topic, and to everybody who's participated. As I said, if you've got any questions that you think haven't been answered, any clarification, then please do contact me. For the details on the website, sreislamic.org, and inshallah we'll try and help you as much as we can. Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakallah, brother. So finally, just housekeeping. So next week's topic is, we have a topic called Importance of Marriage, and an organization, Sunnah and Nikah UK, joining us here. We've got two scholars from the organization who are going to come to talk to us about importance of marriage. If you like today's topic, please share it. Make sure people are aware of the topic. Some really important stuff that has been mentioned here. So share it with friends and families who have children in primary school and secondary school, especially if those are coming to age. And then together, inshallah, we'll make the right choices and make the right decisions and get some movement going. And that's all for this week. Hopefully next week, 6 o'clock, we'll see you then, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.